What's going on, man?
Not much, man. We're back again. Trying to do this thing for 2022, pick up where we left off, and kind of keep that ball rolling.
Yeah, yeah. This one feels like special on a level that I can't really fully describe. And it's not because it's like, how big a guest is, because this is a huge guest.
For sure.
But there's something about conversation. I don't know, man. Without getting too crazy, you move around enough and you have enough conversations, you realize that, like, we all have the same dreams, hopes and dreams, and like everybody wants comfort, everybody wants food,
Right.
everybody likes to look nice from time to time. And it's cool when you can connect with people on that level, even if they are significantly more rich than you or famous than you. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
it just taught me that, through these conversations that, this is a special one, man. This is a
Yeah,
special one. I feel good about it.
for sure. Um, in case you guys are wondering who we are talking about, Dexton Deboree. He is a director, and he has some other titles as far as just that industry in general. He's done projects with Will Smith, his docu-series on YouTube, Best Shape of My Life. He did the Unbanned Jordan 1 documentary. Also last year, I think it was last year, it came out, the documentary on John Morant, which was like pretty dope.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool. That was, there's a difference. It's cool because the band documentary was about the past. The Will
Right.
Smith one and the Ja one were kind of unfolding as they were being recorded.
Right.
So it's cool to see him talk about something that's some point of history that's pretty static, and
Mhm.
then something that's an ever-changing thing where a project literally started as one thing and became another thing in both
Exactly.
instances,
Right.
and how he kind of had to adjust to it. So
Yeah. Uh,
Dexton's an interesting one, man.
Yeah, he's a good guy, man. I appreciate the conversation. We had to kind of do the intro for the podcast a little differently just because of timing and scheduling. We just wanted to make sure we had enough to give you guys most of the conversation. So we'll go ahead and let you guys enjoy. We have a few things that we'll throw out over the next few weeks and keep you guys posted. We might have some changes to the schedule, but hopefully you enjoy this. Give us some feedback. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Music, give us some reviews so we can go up on the charts. And let's get into it, man.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So everybody, this is our guest, Dexton Deboree. Definitely appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with us. First, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Doing
Good,
great.
good,
I'm excited to be here. Excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
For
Thanks
sure.
for being here, man. It's pretty incredible that we have. Tell us what you do so that we have a scope of what you've done, because I do want to talk about very specific things, but what we read as your credentials versus who you see yourself as can be very different. So what do you
Yeah.
do? Yeah, what's your
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a storyteller. First and foremost, like I tell stories, tell visual stories. And that really kind of anchors everything. I think, whether it's short form, advertisement, or a full feature film, or a docu-series, or any kind of series, or even written articles or written forms as well. Like, storytelling is really the thread and the at the core of what I do at the end of the day. For me, I don't really get hung up on the format so much. It doesn't really matter what it is. Like, it's really like the heart and soul and the intention behind the story. And then how that needs to be told, shaped, crafted, and deployed is, secondary to just telling an awesome story. So that's where I come from. I am very specifically focused on certain types of stories, because I came to a realization at one point that there was certain types of stories that really mattered to me, and woke me up in the morning and inspired me. And quite frankly, not to go too deep, but I feel like storytelling was delivered to me in a lot of ways, because I did wake up one night from an ordinary life of being actually kind of more of a meathead and not very creative and not an artist, and I wrote a poem, which was very unlike me at the time. And it literally came. I woke up at like 3 a.m. I was 20 years old, and wrote a poem out of nowhere. And then the next morning woke up and was like, whoa. And it literally changed my life. Like from that point on, I was an artist, and the day before I wasn't. So it brought clarity to my life. It brought purpose and meaning. And so like, I don't take it lightly. And so, years later, when I kind of circled back into it and really kind of came into my own, I realized like the type of stories that mattered to me, and the ones that didn't. And I didn't want to do it as a job anymore or a way to make money. None of that really mattered. It was like, I have to tell stories that I was put on this earth to tell. And that's what I'm doing.
Got you. I guess in terms of you mentioning that you were a meathead, so you had, an athletic background before your part of your career where you're at now, where a lot of those stories are, grounded in that area. What was your relationship with it growing up?
Yeah. So really kind of it really sort of came when I was 13. I was in the 8th grade. I was a chubby kid. I was overweight. My father wasn't in my life for most of my life, really all of my life. And since I was super young. And so I was fairly misguided. I didn't really know who I was. I didn't know, where I fit in the world. I didn't understand a lot of things, especially about being a man or a boy at the time. And, so I was kind of a mess. And I went to this party. It was the very last day of school of the 8th grade. And I got invited to this party, and I went to the party, and the boys there, it was the popular kids were there, whatever. And, like I was sort of always on the fringe, I was invited, but I was also the butt of the joke a lot of the time. And, so the boys got together and created this game that they made up. It was, I don't know, some version of like Capture the Flag, but, it was made up entirely for the point that I'm about to make. But they basically like chose sides. I got put on one side, other kids got put on the other. And it was going to be a shirts and skins competition. And it was designed so that I would take my shirt off and I'd get teased, right? Because I was the fat kid. So that, of course, I wouldn't take my shirt off because I knew what was going down. I got ridiculed anyways, shame, to hell, because I wouldn't take my shirt off, and everyone knew why. And, I basically stormed off and walked home about 2.5 miles in tears, and got to my house and went into my bathroom and like looked at myself in the mirror and actually took my shirt off and stared at myself, chubby and overweight and tears streaming down my face and feeling like, a penny's worth of a human being. And it just, something just hit me and it just clicked. And I stared at myself in the mirror and was like, no, like this is not going to be my life. Like this is not my destiny. This is not how this is going down. Like it stops now. And I put a pair of running shoes on and I went out and ran like 2 miles. Never ran before, like I was chubby and overweight and, wasn't super athletic. And I went for a run, and that summer I ran every single day. And at some point I ordered a weight bench and started lifting weights. And by the time I got to high school, which was at the end of the summer, I grew a couple of inches, so that helped. But, I shed like 15, 20 pounds, put on, a little bit of muscle, but suddenly I was, tall and lean and and in decent shape, and it changed everything. You know, like just my whole experience in my life and people's perception of me was radically different, right? Like girls were like, "Oh, you're so cute now, and you know, you lost weight. Like this is awesome." And like, it changed my life, and like, and I was obviously very conscious of it. And from that point forward, like that was my mission. You know, it was like, okay, this is part of my identity, and you know, it's a very different experience from before to now. And I started wrestling, which was, I was too tall and thin and came to the sport way too late. But what attracted me to it was hard as hell, and the discipline involved was super intense. And that got me to, you know, learn about nutrition and body composition and really educate myself, because I wanted to find the most efficient way to be as lean and light and strong as possible, so I wouldn't have to like go up and down or cut weight or do any of the things that my teammates did. And I focused on training, because I was never really going to be a good wrestler. Again, I didn't have the body type, didn't have the background. You know, kids start when they're like 6, you know, and then by the time they're in high school, you know, they've been doing it for 10 or 15 years or 10 or 11 years or whatever. And for me, that wasn't the case. So I was never really going to be good, but what I could control and what I could sort of contribute to was training. And so I was the fastest guy on the team. I could last longer than anybody else, and I worked harder than anybody else. I just couldn't win on the mat, but I could bust my ass in training. And you know, like I got put on the varsity team because I pushed everyone so hard. And that became my mantra. And you know, I've honestly, like, that's probably contributed to more of my life's success than anything else.
Wow, that's amazing, man.
So that was a point. You said you went from a meathead to a creative. Like, what was that? What brought about that change, and what was your first creative offering after the point where you did this poem and you're like, now I'm gonna make some more creative shit? What was that first piece of creative shit that you did that you kind of were like, this is out in the world?
Yeah. Well, so it was so when I wrote that first poem, I literally, like, that when I woke up the next morning and read it, you know, literally I read it and was like, not only did I write it, and that was like, you know, a radical sort of, you know, transformation or moment that was like, what, you know, like that blew me away. But I actually, it wasn't bad. Like it wasn't a bad poem. It rhymed, and you know, like it wasn't great. You know, it shouldn't have been published or anything, but like it wasn't bad. And it was called "Who Am I?" And the very end of it was like, I do not know. So it was kind of like a self-reflective, you know, question of like, you know, my identity, which makes, you know, a lot of sense in hindsight. But yeah, like it triggered in me, like I was so fascinated by the idea of it and by the words and by the emotion that sort of came out of it and the space that I was in. And so like I started reading and writing every day. I mean, I wrote, I don't know. I mean, I wrote hundreds of poems over the course of like the next year or whatever it was. But along the journey of that, to sort of get to your question, along the journey of that, while I was doing that, I got more into, you know, wordplay and rhymes and rhythms and really kind of playing off that. And I became obsessed with that. But then there was a certain point where like I realized that the words and the emotion were, they had a visual component to them, meaning, you know, like they like set a scene, or they projected an idea or expressed an idea that did have a visual form, but on paper, you know, that wasn't, it didn't exist, right? Like there was a limitation to it. Like you can interpret it, and you know, everybody has their own sort of take on it, which is, you know, the beauty of poetry or anything in written form. But for me, I realized like I needed more, or I wanted more out of it. So I love the again, the written word was, I loved it for what it was, but I also wanted more. And so it started sparking in me this idea of like, what would make it visual, or what would like bring it to life, essentially. And I didn't know the answer. Now I look back and I was like, well, obviously, like put visuals to it, or, you know, make a movie or whatever. But at the time, like that wasn't, that it wasn't like a one-to-one connection. And no, and this, this was quite a while ago, time-wise. So like, film school and people making, their own stuff, the creator generation, like that hadn't happened yet. So it wasn't obvious that like, you had those things at your fingertips, or that was an option. So, I was just sort of swirling with that idea. And then like, I happened to watch the movie The Doors. And
Val Kilmer, right?
Yeah, Val Kilmer plays Jim Morrison, and Oliver Stone directed it. But Jim Morrison goes to film school, in it, and actually did, and that I would like, for whatever reason, that I was like, oh, and because they explore him, he's writing lyrics and stuff like that, and then he brings it, he makes them visual. And did that, kind of his whole life, but obviously was known more for the music. But that sparked in me the idea of like, oh, what filmmaking? That's interesting. So like, I could actually get a camera, and set the scene and actors or whatever, and bring the words to life, right? Like that. Okay, that's a thought. And then I started like going down that rabbit hole and reading about filmmaking and thinking about it, and all of a sudden I was like, fuck. That's the answer to like how to actually take it to the next level and bring it to life. And then I shifted my entire focus of like, how do I get to film school, and ended up going to Florida State, where Jim Morrison went.
Wow.
So it was a little serendipitous or whatever, but not that I wanted to be Jim Morrison, but it was, it was an inspiration. But and then the rest is kind of history. I went to film school and learned all about that. And when I was in film school, like, oddly enough, because I went to sort of learn the visual side of it, I really actually fell more in love with the writing process at the time. And they didn't, that film school at the time didn't even have any writing classes. And so I learned on my own. I picked up books and, sat down and wrote a script, and just worked my way through it, and really kind of left there on the other side, like not wanting to be a director, even though that's why I went there originally. Like I got into it and was like, I just want to be a writer. And I did that for many years and pursued that. And the directing thing just, came back around as the universe would have it.
Got you. So I guess coming out of school and moving into the professional realms, like what project did you work on, and like what was the process of you like working your way up the ranks until where you are? Yeah,
so fairly unorthodox, in that, I came out of film school, wanted to be a writer. All I did was write when I came out. I PA'd a little bit on sets and stuff, but then kind of landed in journalism and started writing and getting paid for it. I wrote magazine articles as a freelancer. I wrote a little bit about health and fitness, so that was kind of more obvious. And then somehow I finagled my way into writing for this cigar and wine magazine, and pitched them an epic story on cigars, of which I knew nothing about going into it. I became an expert, but like at that point, like I knew nothing, and I pitched in like this like huge like multi-part story on the history of cigars, because I had sort of stumbled on something that I read and was like, oh, that's interesting. And it's like cigars have this sort of mysterious allure with a lot of like important figures throughout history, Churchill, and just go down the list, and there's it's had a pretty interesting role in history, actually. Even Kennedy like holding off on the Cuban embargo to let this ship that had cigars coming across the ocean, he wanted to make sure it got into American waters before he put the embargo in place. Literally. That's like was watching the radar and was like, okay, as soon as it gets into American waters,
you just sign a paper.
Yeah, but let me get my cigars first, which is like people, no, and most people don't know that story, but it's fact. But anyway, so I wrote that, and that like kind of launched a journalism path for me for a while. And then I got to a point where I was writing all day, magazine articles, and then at night I'd write screenplays, and it was too much, like I was literally writing like 20 hours a day. And, way up inside my head, and, like becoming antisocial and not dealing with people very well. And like, the opposite of what you want to do when you're trying to get in the film industry. So I decided to really start like putting energy into PAing and like getting myself like in the business as much as I could. And so I did that, and I landed a job as a PA at a post house that was doing a lot of commercials, but was starting to do features, and was working with, David Fincher in the early days.
Oh, geez.
Like big Peter Kerr, who was huge commercial guy, and then did some movies, and Mark Romanek, and all these like amazing artists that, commercial guys that were kind of like ended up having feature careers. And I got in there, and like there was an energy about the place and the people that were working, and it was awesome. And through that process, like I stumbled on the idea of learning to produce, really with the notion of like being in service of my writing, because like I was hell bent on being a writer. That was it. There was nothing else for me. But I was like, well, if I can learn to produce, then then I can produce my own writing and not be just a writer that kind of gets his ass kicked and doesn't have a seat at the table, and all those things, which that's changed a little bit over the years. But I think writers who just write still don't get enough respect and
it's very true.
Credibility. But so I started on the path of producing, and I guess I was good at it because it kind of took off, and I got offered to be an EP for somebody's company at one point. I did that, and then I became more of a seasoned EP, and then I started running companies, and then I got an opportunity to buy a company with a partner at one point, and so I did that, and so I was a producer, and really, I always was writing, and I did some things here and there, and I got paid here and there for it, but I wasn't making a living at it. And again, I was like hell bent on this idea of like, I'm gonna be a screenwriter. That's what I'm gonna do. Like nothing like I'll do this producing thing and whatever, and it kept going well, and I made good money at it and all this other stuff, but I was still always like, but I'll do that until I can become a writer. And through the course of like owning the business, like we got a chance to work with the Jordan brand, and I was really like, I was the EP, managing director, and then by default, like we started crafting our company into being more of an ad agency, hybrid production company thing, early days, before, now that's sort of commonplace, but back then it wasn't. And we started working with the Jordan brand, and I was the account guy. Like I was really, I ran the account essentially, and I was learning to do it, as I was doing it, but that was my role. And I was in this meeting, big group meeting with Jordan, like all the stakeholders of the brand and all their agency partners, of which we were one of them. And at the end of the meeting, it was like a seasonal thing that we did that just sort of got everybody up to speed of like, all right, this is the mission for the next, 6 months. Right. And at the end of the meeting, one of the PR guys, who we didn't really work with, we worked mostly with digital and social and sometimes TV at the time. And the PR guy pulled me aside and said, "Hey man, do you have a few minutes to stay after? I want to talk to you about something." I was like, "Sure." So stayed after, and he's like, "So we got the 20th anniversary of Hair Jordan, which was the ad campaign that was the impetus for Space Jam."
Oh, I remember.
Yeah.
Vividly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, me too. So he's like, so we got the 20th anniversary of Hair Jordan coming up, and instead of just doing like a typical campaign, we want to do a short film. And we heard that you're the screenwriter, and I was like, what? Like that, like I wasn't talking about that. That wasn't part of like, it didn't have anything to do with running the account for them. So it was odd that they even knew that. And I was like, yeah, I am. And he's like, great. Cause like, we don't really want, our copywriters or, traditional agency partners to tackle it because it's a short film and it's a different beast. And we want to see if you want to take a crack at it. So I was like, yeah, great. So wrote the script, literally like walked out of the meeting, was going to the airport. I got in the car to the airport, and I literally wrote the script on the way to the airport. And then I got on the plane and I emailed it to him, which in hindsight's like crazy. You know, like I should have read it and proofed it and fucking, you know, like made sure it was decent. Yeah. But I was like, hey, is this like even remotely in the vein? I didn't know how to speak for bugs. Like, you know, I wasn't like a bugs expert or any of that. And so it was really naive actually. But I sent it to him, was just like, hey, is this even like in the vein? And he wrote me back and was like, this is great. Thanks. We're good. Like, what do you want to be paid? You know, so I gave him a fee and he was like, yeah, okay, that works. And that was it. Didn't hear anything else about it. That was it. And I was just like, I don't know if he likes it, hates it, was like, yeah, hey, thanks for your time. We're going to throw it out and start over. Right. I didn't really know, but I was like, all right, you know, it is what it is. Then like 3 months later, I'm driving down the road back in LA and I get a call from a woman from the brand. And she's like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? And, you know, I don't know why. And she said, because we're going to record that script that you wrote for Bugs at Warner Brothers tomorrow afternoon. Can you come? And I'm like, sure. So she, you know, gives me the details, whatever. And it was odd because, you know, typically they wouldn't have just invited me to be nice guys because I'm going to be excited to see my script read. Like this is just not how things really go down usually. Yeah. So I wasn't really sure why they were inviting me, you know, like there must have been a reason why they wanted me there, but you know, whatever, but it's a cool opportunity. It's Warner Brothers. Bugs is, you know, the voice of Bugs is reading it. Like, that's cool. It's my script in some form. Like, I don't know if they rewrote it or, you know, started over or what, but anyway, so I go and I walk into the room and there's like 30 people in the room. There's a bunch of Warner Brothers executives and Nike executives and Jordan executives and everybody involved in the partnership, which is a big deal. And somebody from a Nike executive who I didn't know and hadn't met before introduces me and says, oh, this is Dex. This is the director. And so I hear that and I have literally like, you know, all of like a second or two to respond. Right. Yeah. And in my head, I'm like, what, you know, like, and then I was like, okay, so I have, there's a fork in the road. I have two choices. I can either go, I'm sorry, no, I'm actually not the director. I just wrote the script or whatever. Or I can just go with it. Right. And, you know, I went with it because that's what showed up. I just, you know, reached out, shook hands, you know, said hi, whatever. And then they're like, all right, great. Okay. You know, take the chair and direct the VO, which if I had thought about the consequence of going with it, I might have not gone with it, right? Because then they're like, oh yeah, there's the seat and there's the booth or whatever, and then I'm like, oh shit, like now I gotta actually like, yeah, I gotta do the role that I don't actually know how to do, but it was too late, so I went, sat down. You know, the third generation of Bugs Bunny walks in the door. You know, his grandfather was the very first voice, his father, and then him. Yeah, so then I'm even more like, okay, so this guy's like a total pro. His life and legacy is like all about like reading the character, and I gotta fucking direct him, right? Like, okay.
That's nuts.
So I sit down and we, you know, hadn't looked at the script in 3 or 4 months. You know, I wrote it in all of like 10 minutes. So I'm like, oh man, like talk about winging it, you know. So we do the session, you know, I direct them, you know, as much as, you know, my instincts would allow me to. And we got done and everyone was happy and we're walking out the door and the Warner Brothers executive is like, okay, that was great. You know, hey, do you have a few minutes to come over to the studio and talk to our animation director? Because he's going to get started soon. And I'm like, sure. And now I'm thinking like, oh man, now I'm deeper,
just snowballing.
Like, yeah, like this, like now what? You know, so like now I'm gonna really get figured out here. So we go over there and she's like, all right, so this is, you know, his name was Spike. And he's like, this is Spike. And you know, he's been the Looney Tunes director for the last 18 years. So anything with any Looney Tunes character, he's the guy. And so ratcheting up the pressure even more. and then we sit down. I sit down across from him, and he's like, "All right, what do you want?" And I'm like, I'm thinking, I have no fucking idea what I want. Right? And so, but I look over at him, and I'm like, "Well, you're the Looney Tunes master. Like, you surely don't need me to tell you, like, what, how this should go down." And he's like, "No. I work for you. I want you to tell me exactly what you want. Let's go frame by frame."
Wow.
So, so I'm like, all right, I get comfortable or whatever. And literally we go through the, 10-minute script, and I made the whole thing up on the fly. Because I didn't know, like, I didn't prep for it. That wasn't my thought process, whatever. And so we go through the whole thing, made it up. We get done. We walk out. Somehow I wasn't found out yet, and we walk out of there, and one of the guys from the brand was like, "All right, so like, because the script was basically Ahmad Rashad, who has interviewed Michael more than anybody else in history, does this like faux, like ESPN-esque, call-in interview with Bugs, and Bugs is in the dressing room, purposably on the set of shooting the 20th anniversary commercial with MJ. MJ's out on set, he's in the dressing room, and he does this phone-in interview, and then proceeds to like totally take the piss out of Michael and take credit for his whole career and all those things, which turned out to be very Bugs, and I was just sort of running on instinct. But they're like, "Okay, so we got a mod next week in New York. Does that work for you?" And I'm again like, "Yeah, sure, I'll make it work." So I shoot, go to New York, and I shoot a mod the next week, and all of it goes really well. And 2 weeks later, the brand calls and is like, "Hey, that was amazing. Let's do it again. We got Chris Paul, and we're having all these issues with the concept. Will you step in and rewrite it and direct it in the next week and a half?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I did that, and then the rest is history. It just snowballed from there.
That's amazing. I guess in all that story, Ronald and I are like huge sneaker guys, and like we kind of work in that space. So it's definitely cool to like hear those stories and get that perspective on it. I guess just talk a little bit more about your relationship with Jordan Brand, because obviously you built a long-standing relationship with them over that time, and then obviously we're both from Baltimore, so like a lot of your pieces, you work with Carmelo a lot. Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we started working with Jordan in like 2014. So it's been 7 years, and I started with the company that I had started with my old partner, and I have since I left a number of years ago and started Falkon, my own company by myself. Again, primarily because I was actually in the process of making Unbanned, which is about the origins and evolution of the Air Jordan 1, essentially, and the cultural revolution that happened in its wake, really. But in the process of making that movie, and it was the first feature I'd done as a director, and first doc I'd ever done. But in the process of making that movie, I was having all these like really, really like deep and meaningful conversations about culture and sneakers, of course, but even beyond that, like, and 90% of it, because most people that are in the film are in there for a couple of minutes total, because there's a lot of people in it, and it's just how it sort of came together. But each of those people I spent an hour or more with in most cases, and they're in there for 2 or 3 minutes. So the other 97 or the other, whatever, 57 minutes of the conversation was like about a lot of other stuff that, wasn't appropriate for a sneaker doc, but was, amazing conversations and experiences. And like, very specifically, I did this interview with Lena Waithe, and we were supposed to have 30 minutes. And we ended up spending like 2.5 hours together.
Wow.
And on camera. And I walked out of there, and the world just sort of looked a little bit different to me. It just had shifted a little bit. Like, we were talking about, the connection between sneakers and worth and the Black community and slavery, all a lot of her, ideas. Like, I wasn't pushing to take it there. It was just more of like, they were her thoughts. I mean, and she's very profound in her thinking on a lot of things, but it really just, you know, it just shifted my worldview, you know, a little bit, but enough to be pretty significant. And I got in the car and was riding home. I wasn't driving, I was riding. And, you know, I'm sitting within it and I'm just like, fuck, man, like, you know, just really fulfilled and inspired and like even more like, all right, you know, like this film's going to be something special.
Yeah.
And I looked down at my phone and I got this notice from Instagram, and it was a video that my company had posted. And I looked at it and it was this like cell phone ad. And it was, and I'm like, and
it didn't line up.
You know, dude, yeah. Not only did it not line up, like, you know, like, you know, I was so viscerally hit by it. And it was fine for what it was, like, whatever. But in the space that I was in that moment, and then these, you know, people are like, ooh, let's buy cell phones. And I'm like,
right.
What the fuck, you know, like,
and
I was like, I can't do that anymore. And like, it wasn't my piece. I wasn't even involved in it, but it had my name on it.
Yeah.
You know, like my company's doing it. That's part of my brand. That's part of what I do. And I was just like, I can't do that anymore at all. Like all I want to do is what I just did earlier tonight. Right. That's what woke me up in the middle of the night all those years ago. That's why my path has gone the way that it has. You know, like, this is where I need to be. This is what I was put on earth to do, not that.
Right.
And so, like, I called my business partner at the time. I was like, dude, we're not doing that anymore. And he's like, what? You know, like, we're making good money. We're doing this.
Yeah.
Everything's going well. Like, what are you talking about? You know, like, maybe you're just having, you know, you're in your feelings and you're having a mood in a moment or whatever. But, like, let's talk tomorrow when you're back out of it, you know? But I woke up and was like, genie's out of the bottle, man. Like, I can't put it back in, you know? And that went on for months, but I was really clear of like, all right, my mission in life is got to align with what I'm doing on a daily basis. And I cannot disconnect those two things. I want to make movies and TV shows and advertising that like really fucking matters. And I don't want to do anything else. And that was it. And, you know, he wanted to keep doing what he was doing, and nothing wrong with that. And he does really well. And super talented dude. But it just wasn't for me. So I was like, all right, well then I'm just going to go and do my thing. Back to your point. I started my own company. I took Jordan with me because I was really, you know, the guy that they worked with. Yeah. And the, you know, the small team around it was, you know, was really what I was focused on. So took that and Nike, and that was it at the time. You know, didn't have a body of work other than what we had done for them, and you know, didn't have anything else. But was like, I can wing in a prayer and an intention and this piece of business, and that'll be that. And that's what we did. So so the rest, you know, is kind of history.
I had a question about what you just mentioned, just kind of talking to Lena and the stories that you capture. You know, sports is a pretty Black thing with a lot of Black inhabitants, and you know, and you take these stories and there's a care that goes into them that I've noticed, especially watching Unbanned. It could have been exploitative. It could have been kind of like, and this is how people act crazy over Jordans. You didn't do any of that, right? So my question to you is like, how did you develop this eye for sensitivity about that sort of thing, and really showing that, you know, these stories matter, you know, you want them to be full of integrity. How did you figure that out about your storytelling skills?
Yeah. It's interesting, you know, I think when I think about it, and, you know, I've been asked sort of similar questions, but I think the way that you framed it was, I appreciate that a lot. You know, when I was a kid, I grew up in Florida. And, you know, if you're familiar with Florida, other than Miami, the rest of Florida, is still, you know, it's still the South. Right. And there's, unfortunately, there's still a lot of and it's, this isn't a blanket statement. There's plenty of people and areas and that ride the exception, but the South still carries a lot of historical ideologies that could be reshaped and reformed, and should be, in my opinion. Right. But when I was growing up, this was a while ago now, it was even more that way. And in the town that I grew up in, there's sort of a river that runs through it. And on one side of the river, all the white people live, and on the other side of the river, all the black people live, right? And that it was I didn't know this growing up, but it was very much by design, right? Yeah. From history, and that's the way that it sort of formed, and it hadn't really changed, even in the 80s. Yeah. And for me, like I think if I really analyzed it, I didn't have a father, in my house. It was very turbulent environment that I grew up in most of the time. It was very up and down because my mom was sort of married and then divorced and married and then divorced. So like we'd go from living in a small apartment to a big house on the water to a small apartment again to another big house, like depending on sort of the marital status or whatever. But my point is that like I had a similar like domestic environment to a lot of my friends that were black, because their fathers weren't in the house, and not to be even stereotypical, but that was common, right? Yeah. And that was my experience, and so there was a synergy or an affinity for us, and I was naive to the fact that there was supposed to be like a line between us or a difference or whatever. Like I didn't have a lot of rules. There wasn't a lot of oversight. There wasn't, a strong family structure or whatever, which again was something that like brought us together. But it also meant that like I wasn't aware of perhaps the ideologies and the ways that maybe I was supposed to think as a black, as a white boy. Right. And so I had a lot of friends that, were athletes or not athletes, didn't matter. But like a lot of my friends were black, and white. It was a mix, but it was just natural for me. Right. Yeah. And in fact, I associated more to my black friends because they also didn't have dads. My white friends did, right? They had normal families and it was all this and white picket fences. But that, that wasn't my experience, and it wasn't my black friends' experience. So it was more normal and more comfortable for me. And so when I got older and I was literally like, I moved to LA right out of college. And my best friend at the time he played a couple seasons for the Dolphins, and moved out to LA with me. I'd met him in Florida kind of randomly or whatever. Big, stacked black dude. And we were thick as thieves. And we were in West Hollywood. Like, again, naive. I didn't totally understand the environment I was in or whatever. We go into this like, this clothing shop, and we're looking around, and the people are like staring at us. And I was like, I was aware that they were staring at us, and I went to him. I was like, I think they think we're like a couple. And he was like, and he was like, yeah, and like I wasn't used to that experience, whatever. But I was like, I think they think we're like together, like because we're like, like we're close, so like like we're touching each other or whatever, like we weren't a couple. Friends, right? Yeah, we're friends, we're boys, like it's all And he was like, no, dude, they're staring at me, and I'm like, what do you mean? And he was like, I'm the only black dude in here, man. Like, and I'm the only black dude on, like around. And I was like, oh shit, like, and then I started thinking about it. And then like everywhere we went, I started becoming more conscious of it. I'd been around it, and I should have had that insight, years before, but it just hit me for whatever reason in that moment. And from that point on, like I started becoming aware of how people looked at him versus how they looked at me. And it was different, right? It was decidedly different. And I became more and more aware of it. And then I started thinking about my childhood and realizing like, wait, why why was it split down the middle with this body of water?
Yeah.
And why was this that way? And why was that, you know, like, and all of a sudden it really just unfolded of like, okay, wow, like the world is black and white, and it's a very different experience. It's just a very different experience. And like, and I wasn't okay with it. You know, it was like, it didn't work for me. I'm like, why? There's zero difference between me and my boy. Like the difference is like the shade of his skin is different, but like I have white friends that have blonde hair. What's the fucking difference? Like, does that mean that they're a different human being, or the value's different, or they should be judged different? Like what? You know, like I mean, all of it is very absurd to me. But I became very aware of it, and it became like, I became, you know, not okay with it. You know, just didn't work for me. It was like, and then also I think because I always felt like, you know, I was a little bit different, and I was sort of judged a certain way, and you know, I was always the odd man out, whether it was because I was the fat kid, or because I didn't have a father, or because my home was broken in ways that people around me it wasn't, or whatever it was. Or, you know, a lot of it was like, also like I was a very creative and imaginative kid, you know, from the jump, but no one ever told me that was an option. No one ever said like, oh, maybe you're a little bit different and can't pay attention in school or whatever because you have this really vivid imagination. They were like, no, you don't fit in. You're doing the wrong thing. You're a bad kid. Right? Like you know, and so like I owned that, and I got in trouble, and I did things that lived up to that because I didn't know there was another option. Nobody told me that, you know? And so all of those things just fed into her. Like, I think just my sensibility around it, it's like, yeah, it's very specific, you know, to race inequality, because I've had such a visceral experience of that, and always felt like I just always felt strongly that it's just like that, it just shouldn't fucking exist, you know? I mean, I think we can all agree on that, but it's just like, and it's not as simple as like, you know, let me just be conscious of it, or, you know, let me, you know, do this on the surface or that on the surface. It's so systemic, and it's so ingrained, and it's so deep, and it's so intentional by so many people, which is the other thing that's, you know, is, again, it's, you know, I could go on and on about it, but it's I don't know. It's always been a very personal thing for me, and something that runs deep from childhood, and feel like it's an injustice that needs to be course corrected. And, you know, and I just have always wanted to do my part to do that.
For sure. And I think that comes out in the projects that you've been working on, because like the Unbanned documentary, like we said, it's not just about the shoe. Like that's the root of it, but you also go into where the state of America was at the time, for where the NBA was, and then from the NBA, this new crop of guys and Jordan and all these people are coming in, and people are getting shoe deals, and the effect of, you know, that on society. And you basically tell a full story of that. And then I think it also comes out in the docu-series that you did with Ja, you know, just going down there talking with his family. And obviously during COVID, you know, all the protests and everything that happened around the country, you touch on those things. So I think it's very intentional in the work that you do. And, you know, for me personally, I appreciate that, you know, as far as, you know, stories that you're telling. And I guess, you know, kind of to transition out of that, more recently, you've kind of worked on a little bit of a personal project. You got to work with Will Smith for his YouTube docu-series. What was that experience like? Because for those who don't know, it's Best Shape of My Life. And for you, I think the story kind of abruptly and unexpectedly changed. And you're like shown in there a little bit when it happens. What was that whole experience like for you?
Yeah, well, if we had another 2 hours, I could really fully do it justice. But I mean, it was it's hard to explain. You know, it was you know, the show is kind of about life transformation, and well, not kind of, it is about that. And for me, it was entirely that. Like it really, it did actually transform my life in a lot of ways. You know, when they first called me about it, you know, they're like, we want to do a show about Will losing weight. And I was like, okay, cool. And I sat down and like thought about it, and I put together this treatment. They didn't ask me for it. It was really just sort of a series of interviews. But for me, like, I need to wrap my head around it and know where I'm coming from and make sure that like my intention for it is aligned with the mission, and we're doing it, you know, for the same reasons. And I went in and was like, man, this is a huge opportunity to go way deeper, you know, like, because anything physical is also emotional and spiritual and psychological and all these other things, because that's my own experience with it. I know that to be true, and like it's got to be true for Will too. Don't know him, never met him, you know, was going in sort of cold, but like there's no way that it's just physical. And the team was like, no, we don't want to go too deep, you know, he doesn't want to be super vulnerable, like that's not really the point of the show. He's cool with that, but he'll do that in another setting. This is just about weight loss. We want to have a little bit of fun, educate people, inspire people. That's it. And I was like, okay, cool, but we'll see. You know, like, because like something was just like, I don't know. You know, like, yeah, I hear you, but I don't know. I definitely don't agree. But we'll see. And it was enough to where it was like I felt so strongly that like I got to do it anyways. You know, like even though I know they're saying that it's not this, it's that, but like there's something about this that we're gonna get to. I'm sure of it. So I'm gonna dive in and figure it out. And so I did, and you know, it never would have imagined that it like sort of took the trajectory that it did, because it was like, you know, we're 6 months into shooting this thing, and we still don't even we're like arguing over what the format is, what the story is, and like the thing that really unlocked it, I think, for me and even for Will, and then, you know, by proxy the rest of the team, was like I realized at a certain point there, I one morning we would go to the gym or we would go to the track every morning at 4:30 in the morning and run. And then we would go back later to the gym and work out 7 days a week, more or less. And there was, you know, large group of guys, you know, he was writing the book. So like, you know, his editor was there, and his brother was there because he was helping on the book. And so there was a group of us working on the show, working on the book, you know, his entourage that travels with him anyways. And we're all sort of training together and all sort of a part of it. And we tap into a little bit of the show, but it's, you know, it's even larger group than we focused on. But point being, like, you know, a couple of cars take us to the track every morning. That particular morning, I was like, hey, Will, I'm going to ride with you alone because I want to talk to you about structure and format or whatever. It'll be our meeting time in the 15-minute ride to the track. And he's like, yeah, cool. So I get in the car with him. It's just me and him. And I have some notes ready or whatever. And I'm going to pitch him another version of like how the show's going to go down, which is, you know, that's happened like 10 times at this point. And like, I'm about to start getting into it. And I was like, you know what? Let me tell you, I'm going to scrap that for a minute. Let me tell you a story. So I told him the story about when I was 13 years old, going to that party at the end of the year. And because all of a sudden I realized, like, I think he needs to understand that I'm having my own experience with this thing and why, versus I get it as a creative and as a writer and a director. Like, it wasn't about that. It was like, as a human being and as a man that is going through this thing and actually unexpectedly having this visceral reaction to it all, because it's so sacred to me on levels that prior to that, I didn't even know. Like, I wasn't, you know, just because I hadn't had a reason to really think about it.
Right.
So I shared that story with him, and then I proceeded to tell him, like, ever since I started the show, and very specifically when I got to Dubai, we were in Dubai for like 3 months. The moment that I landed, I had no intention of working out with the group at all. I was adamantly opposed to it because it's been my thing since I was 13.
Right.
It's very sacred to me, and I don't share it with anybody ever. Never have, and I never will. Was my attitude.
Right.
And I got in late one night, and I got a text about the run the next day, and for whatever reason, I woke up and I joined the run, and then I joined the workout, And then next thing you know, I'm a few weeks into it. I'm like, wait, what the fuck's happening? Why am I working out with you guys? And all of this stuff started coming up. But day one, after I got back from the track, I got back to my hotel room and I vlogged, was like a video journal.
Yeah.
And I've never done that before in my life. I had no intention of doing it. It wasn't a thought process. I was like, oh, I'm gonna journal. The video journal. I literally just got back to my hotel room and had such an experience with it that I just like had to like talk about it with myself. And so I did, and then I did that every day. And so now we're like months into it or whatever. And so I share all this with Will. I'm like, what I need you to understand is like, this isn't a job, and this isn't like just about creative or filmmaking or whatever. Like this is very personal to me. And I understand how personal it is to you. And I need you to understand that that's what I'm tapping into. I don't give a fuck about anything else. All the rest of it's like, it's fine, but it's like, it's not the point. And he was just like, man, that's beautiful. Like, that's actually part of the show, right? Like that it's having that impact on you. Like, that's what I wanted from the beginning for everybody. And so we get into this conversation and both of us are like tearing up and it's like super personal and really like deep. And then at the end of it, I was like, you know what, man? Like, I just realized like I had all these notes and I was going to tell you about the like structure of the show and all these things. And like, this conversation and what we have been doing, including the arguments, the wrestling over the confusion, that's the show.
Right.
Like, I was like, we've already been making it and we just didn't even fucking know it. And he was like, dude, you're right. And I was like, I think like from here out, man, like, let's not have another conversation about structure or format or what it should be or shouldn't be. Let's just fucking throw that shit out and trust the process. And he was like, that's it. And then like literally like for the next, and through the rest of the show, it was like like we'd get into something and he'd look over at me. He was like, I'm trusting the process. I'd be like, all right, yeah, me too. All right. Like, we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to keep going. And I don't know, like, yeah, it was at some point, like someone was like, how are you working out and shooting at the same time? Which was, again, never my intention. And I was like, I don't know. Like I'm method directing, I guess, which like, I don't even know if that's a term, but it was like, it just felt like it was the only way that I could do it because unless I'm in it, I can't capture it, right. and again, like it wasn't a thought. It wasn't like, it wasn't planned or, premeditated. It was just like, suddenly I found myself in it. And the more that I got in it, the more I was like, okay, I understand what's going on. I understand Will. I understand what he's going through because I'm going through it.
Right.
And obviously, he's his own man. And, but like, I get it on a much deeper level than just observing it and analyzing it. I'm literally in it and having my own experience with it, and I understand it.
Nice. Definitely appreciate that. And, just to kind of start winding things down, we kind of do like a little quick hits at the end, just favorite things. Favorite sneakers, since you worked on a sneaker documentary.
I mean, the ones hands down always are going to be my favorites. The OG breads are really kind of at the top, but I'll take any one any day. I love my customs. I got some people make customs here and there. But every single one on the planet. There's not really a one that I don't like. There might be one or two out there, but anyone is my jam.
Got you. Favorite project that you worked on that we haven't talked about, or like a favorite person that you've gotten to work with?
I mean, Will for sure is right up there at the top of the list. Lena, as I mentioned, Michael B. Jordan. We spent a short time together, but yeah, he was amazing, and that was an amazing experience. Mello, is my guy. I got a project brewing with him right now, and we've done a number of things together. He was involved in Unbanned, even behind the scenes, a bit. Oh, wow. But he's definitely my guy, and much more of a dimensional and thoughtful and soulful guy than most people realize, you know.
Sure.
Which maybe we'll get a chance to show that a little bit in the thing we're working on. But yeah. So you know, it's always and I mentioned to you guys, you know, offline that I shot MJ for the third time last month. It's interesting because I did this. I again like journaled on video because I realized when I was about to shoot him that the times that I've shot him in my life have always been sort of significant moments in my life. Not just the fact of the shoot, but like whatever's going on in my life. It tends to be sort of like a watershed moment. So it's interesting that he sort of shows up and I get this opportunity to like spend time with him at these like pivotal moments in my life, and then sort of life changes a little bit in the aftermath. And it's true of, you know, just a month ago. So I don't know, that's significant. And, you know, always, he's like walking in the room where the sun is placed in the room, where it takes over and it eclipses everything else. And he just has an aura and a magic that is unexplainable.
Did he have a hoop earring when he came in? Did he have the hoop earring?
Nah, not that day. No, because he had been out on the golf course all day.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, he was in his element though.
Oh, I can imagine.
Did you have one to toss up, Ronald?
So we talked about Shoe. Okay, have you considered doing a full length feature, like writing an hour and a half, 2 hour film? And you know, you've been doing these documentaries, and I could tell you're a good storyteller. Do you see yourself doing a feature at some point?
Yes, it's that's very much on the horizon. That's kind of the next thing. Yeah. Nice. So yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Did you want to go ahead and pitch the branded temp?
Oh yeah. So the last part, at the conclusion of our podcast, we have this segment called the branded 10. You basically pick 10 songs that kind of what defines Dex with some soundtrack to your life. 10 songs that you would think would be like the biography of Dex. Give us 10 songs that you're kind of aligned with.
If you can do it off top. If not,
if you can do it, if not, I bet you can. Well, give us 5. Give us 5, and then
we'll get the.
Yeah.
Because we put a playlist together afterwards, and we put it with your episode. So just
cool. So definitely. I mean, really, the whole album of Parents Just Don't Understand from Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff, which I've never told Will that before, but it was the very first album that I ever bought in my life. It was the cassette tape, because that was the thing back then. I pulled the netting off of my 10-inch subwoofer so I could see the. You know, so I could see the woofer boom a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, and I was like 12. So that, you know, and then later Summertime, you know, was definitely a top jam. And I didn't even really think about those things when I was working with Will until there was a moment we were in Miami doing a book reading. DJ Jazzy Jeff's on the Wheels of Steel. He's just there kind of warming up the room and like getting people in a vibe before they drop into this like writing session or reading session. And Will comes in at a certain point. He's just playing random songs. Will walks in, and I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, but like Jeff all of a sudden at some point like dropped into Summertime, and Will just started freestyle rapping to it. And the both of them went on this whole thing and they performed it like, and it wasn't planned. It was friends and family, and it was a very casual setting. They were just messing around, and in the middle of it, all of a sudden I was like, oh fuck, like how did I get here? You know, like, and really how perfect is it? Because I remember like that was my jam. Like with like I must have listened to it a million times and like vibed out on it, you know, in college. And it was like, here I am with the two guys that did it, like performing it, you know, with only like another 20 people in the room. Like, that's fucking cool. So that for sure. NWA was, you know, the soundtrack to my teenhood. You know, like when that came out, I was like, yeah, this is me. Like, you know, with some liberties, obviously, you know,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
it wasn't exactly my experience, but it felt like it was.
You had your Raiders fitted on?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. I had the posters up in my room. Like I was like, they get me. In fact, you know, I'll incriminate myself here, but I stole the CD because I thought that was the best way to
that was the way to do it. You had to really live it
an
up.
NWA album. Like I'm not gonna buy it. Like they don't want people buying the shit. I mean, although they did, but you know,
for sure.
I'm gonna steal it because that's what they would do. You know, like so. And you know that I was a different guy. I was a younger guy, and yeah. What else? I mean, I'm a massive Lil Baby fan. I'll say that.
Oh, okay.
So like
that Florida connection.
Right. Yeah. He I don't know. Yeah, I just think he's immensely talented. So anything by him is definitely my jam. And there's too many to list, really. I don't know. It's like sure. There's not a song he does that I don't like. Nas, I'm a huge Nas fan, you know, a little more old school, but huge Nas fan, Common fan, you know, like intellectual hip hop and that spoken word, you know, vibe is definitely my jam. I think because of the poetry and things like that. Mm-hmm. You know, and I mean, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't like Jay-Z, you know, right. You know, I got to put him on there as well. And Kanye, as strange as some of his shit may be, I still think he's a musical genius.
Yeah, man.
Like, you know, whatever else you think about him is fine, but he is really talented, in my opinion. Sure. Yeah, I don't know if that's 10, but I think that's.
I was gonna say it's pretty decent. We'll
cool.
Put it together from there. Cool. But yeah, man, don't want to hold you up too long. I know you got some other things going on, so we definitely appreciate you sitting down talking with us. It was really fun talking with you. Hopefully we get to do it again soon and stay in touch.
Yeah, I'd love to.
For sure. As far as like your work, anything you want to promote or shout out, or like where people can check out what you do.
Yeah, they can go to I mean, IG is just my full name, Dexton Deboree, and then my website is falkoncontent.com, Falcon with a K. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm working on I'm at the tail end of a new series that is based in Atlanta and illuminates Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs in Atlanta. But rather than sort of like a traditional kind of business makeover show, it's it's very much picking business owners that have like a really deep intention, and the why of their business is really profound in a lot of ways, literally, and the impact that they want to have on the world, and they're all like geared towards businesses that are like that are really supporting and illuminating the Black community in general. We're super blessed to even be considered for it. We made sure that the approach to the show is sort of walking the walk of the message of the show itself. So we got this amazing crew of people, and everybody's sort of doing it for the cause as much as the job. Shaq is the host, cool. And in a very serious role in a much more dramatic tone than we're used to. Yeah. Between takes, he's added all the levity and humor that you expect, and he's been amazing to work with. But also, just a super genuine and authentic guy, and really, really passionate about the message of the show. That's going to be on TNT, and there's a list of guest stars in it that are really awesome. But that's something I'm really, really proud of. It's the message is awesome. The way that we brought it together is really incredible. It's super, super special. So
for sure, we'll definitely be on the lookout for that. Ronald,
thank you so much for your time, man. Like I understand that you're a very busy person. You have documentary after documentary coming out. I cannot wait for this Carmelo thing you're talking about. You're kind of cheeky about, but we are huge Carmelo fans.
Awesome. Yeah, well, you will not be disappointed.
Huge
really
Carmelo.
Cool.
Yeah, I've been working on it with him for a while.
Cool.
So yeah, it's gonna be badass.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming by, and come back when you're talking about that, when you're putting that out. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, love to. Yeah, maybe we can convince Mello to hop on as well. We'll see.
Oh, that would
for sure. We'll see what we can do.
I may faint. I may faint after. Let me tell you a crazy story about that. So I had this thing where my dad passed away a couple years ago, and he was a big Wizards fan. So like I had this thing where I took a bunch of friends with me to individual games, just kind of represent, it was like driving in cars with comedians like Seinfeld style.
Yeah.
But like I took Donte with me to see the Rockets play.
And Carmelo and I have a little bit of a connection. I actually used to play for his AAU team. So like that was,
Yeah. So it was like this connection, and he and I have connected through Carmelo talk and all that stuff. And like an hour before we're supposed to get to DC to see the game, he was let go from the Rockets, and that big gap happened. I was devastated. Donte was devastated, and it was like, how could this get any weirder?
Yeah. Ironically enough, James Harden ended up going for like 50 that night, so it kind of made up for it. But
yeah. But it was such a sad day, and I'm so happy to see what he's done, man. I'm super excited to see what you have with him.
Yeah, and we get into that as well, and like the sort of the deeper things behind the surface that kind of went down, which are really, really amazing. I mean, I think what he was able to do in turning it around, and the shift that he made on personal level, on an athletic level, is crazy, and it's awesome. Yeah,
man, for sure. So yeah, let's go ahead and get up out of here. Ronald, where can they find you?
My Instagram name is Who Is Ron James. I also have a small t-shirt thing that I'm doing, TJM Goods, at TJM Goods.
Nice.
Yeah, that's about it for me, man.
Cool.
Also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I also have a movie podcast called Movie Schmovie. Love talking about movies and home theater stuff. So Movie Schmovie on Instagram. So
there you go. As far as the podcast, Branded Podcast, BRNDD Podcast, pretty much everywhere, brandedpodcast.com if you want to check out the playlist that we put together, previous episodes, our other guests, some other content that we'll be doing. My social media is Cotton Smooth, COTTEON Smooth. You'll see the work that I do. I'm a designer, so you'll be able to see like all the work that I do, and random work inside of like footwear and other stuff that I do. But yeah, if you're checking out the YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. If you're on Apple Music, make sure you leave us some comments and feedback, and give us a star rating. We'll highly appreciate that, and we'll have some more content coming soon. Appreciate you, Dexton.
Thank you.
Yeah,
man.
you guys. Yeah, good talking to you guys.
Appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Peace.
Peace.